Okay, hi guys. We're going to do, this is a quick screencast. I'm going to walk you through two different psychosocial or social development sociologists, Erikson and Jean Piaget. These are two people, if you've taken psychology, you would have learned a little bit about them as well. So in the last screencast, we talked about Freud and his psychoanalysis of personality. We're going to take a look at Erikson's concept of psychosocial development, which he pulls a little bit of some stuff about personality development that Freud talked about, but he looks more about how personality is only a portion of our social development. So the idea of psychosocial development is the development of human self-awareness and personality in conjunction with social influences at different stages of life. So he definitely is going to look at your stage of life, what are those influences, and how does that then project into your own self-awareness and your development of your personality. So he's taking you through your life stages and how at each stage of life you encounter new influences and how that may change or develop in your personality. A crucial terminology that Erikson uses, and I want to make sure you know, is this term of crisis. He believes that every stage of development in our lives has what's called a crisis. Sometimes you'll see it labeled as a conflict. And that means that there is usually two main ways your development can go. It's kind of like you come to like a fork in the road and either you go right or left. So in this case, I'm going to use an example here, which is in his first stage. He believes that in our first stage of life, which is infancy to about 2 years old, the crisis we encounter during those first 2 years of life is to learn how to trust or to mistrust. So this trust versus mistrust would be considered the crisis. You are either going to develop more trust based on your experiences or less trust based on your experiences. So example, if you experience a lot of trust issues at this stage, where you are neglected as an infant or a young child, where you have a lot of inconsistencies, and while you are not totally conscious of what those things are, you're learning through your senses that things are not as they should be. You may grow to have a harder time trusting people in later stages in life. So that's how the crisis works. Either you experience a lot of trust, so you develop a strong sense of trust, or you experience a lot of mistrust, and that could influence you having a harder time trusting people as you get older. Now, this is not set in stone. Obviously, some of this will impact some people more than others, and this is a theory. So remember, we can't prove this. So to give you an idea, these are the 8 stages. So if you take a look at this chart, here over here, you'll see the stages, the crisis is labeled next. And then what would be the favorable outcome? What do you hope to come out of at that stage of your life? And what is kind of the unfavorable, what you're trying to avoid? So as we talked about trust versus mistrust. In your second year of life is really when you learn this idea of autonomy versus doubt. Autonomy is really your ability to have self-control, to understand you have a sense of independence. If you are allowed to learn how to do things on your own, if your parents let you learn that the stove is hot, or your parents let you try to climb the stairs by yourself, or a lot of chances of opportunity to do things on your own, you start to develop a stronger sense of autonomy. If you have parents that tell you no all the time, if you're constantly having things taken from you, or if you have highly restrictive barriers put on you, you start to question whether or not you are able to do certain things. Is it appropriate? You start to maybe have a sense of doubt and maybe shame. 3 to 5 years is the idea of initiative versus guilt, that you are willing to be a self-starter. You take your own initiatives. Again, that's kind of encouraging that independence. The unfavorable outcome is that you're kind of scolded for when you try to do something on your own. You learn at a young age that you have to do what other people are doing, or you're not supposed to be making your own decisions. And sometimes this happens very innocently. Parents are often trying to protect their children, and if they protect them too much, that can instill a sense of doubt and guilt. And sometimes if you have too many crises that are on the unfavorable side, it really can impact your growth and development socially and your development of personality as you get older. So I'm not going to walk you through all of this, but you can see sixth year to puberty is this idea of industry versus inferiority. Industry and initiative go very much together. Industry is that you're willing to work hard at something, you want to put the time in, you have a real ambitious personality, or you have the drive, the work ethic. And then you have the unfavorable is this idea that, you are afraid sometimes to share your thoughts and opinions. You don't always feel confident in what you're doing. You feel less significant than others. This is where you guys are at. You're kind of in the transition of adolescence into early adulthood. So high school is often this time where people have the identity crisis. They're trying to identify who they really are, or they're very confused. So many of you may relate with this stage because this is where you guys are at right now. If you've really had a strong, favorable development on all the other crises leading up to your high school years, you may be feeling better about identifying who you are. If you have had issues of doubt, if you have felt insignificant or inferior, you also may be dealing with more confusion. As you move into and through college, you're going to be into that early adulthood, that intimacy versus isolation. Can you commit to others? This is very strongly built on trust, on confidence, on independence. You're clear who you are. You have a strong sense of identity. Or if you isolate, you have a hard time being in affectionate relationships. This could go rooted all the way back to your inability to trust people. And then we go to middle age and aging years. Generativity. Generativity is really your concern for your family and just society in general. As people get into their 30s and 40s and 50s, they have, they kind of are not so self-absorbed. They're now looking at the needs of their family. If you are more self-absorbed, you're concerned about your own well-being. Sometimes people go through what they call a midlife crisis at this age, where they're so caught up in things that they are unhappy with or their own future that they don't really have the ability to focus on their family. And then when we get into our aging years, so this would be seniors, senior citizens, the integrity versus despair. You see some seniors, you see some of these people in the news turning 100 years old, and they're so vibrant and they're so strong, and they are, really persevering, and they're willing to continue life as best they can. But then you also have some people that are just really ready to die. They're ready to give up. They maybe have lost somebody they are close to. So they have a hard time looking at their life ahead of them without what they were used to. So these are the 8 stages. Everything has a crisis, and you can go one of 2 directions. So you are going to be doing an activity, formulating a chart very much like this, but you're going to walk me through where you think your crisis is at each stage up to adolescence. You'll see that assignment in Canvas. The other person we're going to take a quick look at is Piaget. Piaget is more about your cognitive development. Cognitive development is your intellectual development. It is how your intellect grows as your social development takes place. So if you think about it, what you learn in kindergarten is drastically simplified from what you're learning in 8th grade or high school. Well, there's a reason for that. And according to what Piaget says, it's because your brain has not intellectually or cognitively developed for you to be able to do 8th grade material at the age of 5. So we're going to take a look at his stages. He has 4 stages of intellectual or cognitive ability and development. So the first stage is the sensory motor period. This is really when you're learning how to use your senses, when you're learning coordination, object permanence. Your parents will come back after they leave the house. Then you have pre-operational period, the development of symbolic thought marked by irreversibility, centrism, or centration and egocentrism. So if you think about, 2 to 7 years old, kids are always focusing on themselves. They have a hard time really understanding impacts on other people. They are also learning that they can move things around. Sometimes they can control things. They have a better sense of categorization and how to control things. Concrete operational period is when you start to really understand more definitive concepts and can understand how they connect with other things. So understanding order and categorization, classification, hierarchy. And then finally, you have your formal operational period. You guys are still in this process. This is an ongoing process all through adulthood. It is really when you can really pull together abstract ideas. You have more logical thinking, more systematic thinking. Abstract are things that you can't visually see. You have to kind of cognitively pull ideas together to come up with more of a concrete idea. So things like government, you can't see the philosophies of government. You have to kind of discuss them and see the connections through permanent objects you associate them with. That would be a lot of the math and sciences that you're learning in high school and in college as well. But many of us are not really ever formally completing the formal operational period, and some of us will only achieve so much of that, while others of us will go beyond. So these next few slides just take you through that in a little bit more detail. Stage 1 is that sensory motor, differentiating self from objects. You realize if you pull a string, something will go into motion. If you shake a rattle, it makes a noise. If your parents leave home, they're going to come back. Stage 2 is the pre-operational, learning languages. This is when you learn to speak, to read, to write. You also learn that you start to learn that you are not always the center of the universe, but you're not quite there yet until maybe closer to 10 years old. You can put things into categories, like all the red blocks, all the shapes go together, etc. This is really going to be upper elementary school, where you learn logical thinking. You can understand number order. You can understand that things have a certain mass or size to them. Certain things have certain weights, different features. You can start to put things into more detailed categories. And then, as I said, stage 4, which we are all at right now, learning abstract ideas, hypotheses, systematic thinking, and really starting to look at the hypothetical, looking at things in the future, ideological things, etc.